So a couple things that really jump out on this is first, we tend to do a better job meeting and probably setting our inspection targets, which, kind of makes sense to me because those are short-term deliverables, things that are more easy to get done in a single fiscal year, where permits and basin plans and TMDLs tend to take longer. And it's harder to plan and then deliver on the plans. The other positive message here is that the results have improved markedly from the previous fiscal year, and you can see that in all categories. We saw significant improvement, and in a minute I'll show you it by regional board as well. Just a couple points here. Meeting the targets is really important, and of course we have room to improve here. But the process is also really important. Just going through the process of setting targets at the beginning of the year and then tracking those, the tracking progress periodically throughout the year, and then getting to the end of the year, closing the books and seeing how you did. And then, understanding if you didn't meet your target, why that is. I mean, and a good example is, for this report, we're 6 weeks late in getting this report finished. We usually do it in September. Well, the drought happened this year, and Rafa, myself, Max, we've all been busy working on the last item that you just saw, the conservation item. So things come up, and it's not always possible to meet the targets that you set in the beginning of the year. But again, understanding why you're not is really critical. So this is the slide just showing again fiscal year 12-13. 13-14 by regional board and then state board on the far right. And again, across almost all of the organizations, we saw some really impressive improvements in results. Still room for improvement. I wouldn't declare mission accomplished type of thing, or complete success, but we seem to be moving in a very positive direction. There have been regional boards, and specifically I'll name Region 4 and Region 5, where we've really seen concerted efforts from them to track their work rather than wait to the end of the year and figure out, well, what happened, why didn't we meet our targets? I'm not suggesting other regions are doing that, but they've come forward and talked to us, and they've really interfaced with us a lot throughout the year. They're calling Rafa once a month, and they're saying, this is where we think we are. Do you agree? Yes, we agree. So they're looking at it in terms of, is the data getting entered properly, and then also, is the work getting accomplished in a timely manner throughout the year, and not just waiting to the end of the year. And then, obviously, if you look at the chart, Regions 1, Region 2, Region 3, Region 4, Region 6, Region 9, all had really tremendous improvement in terms of the overall percent of the targets that were met.
And how much of that is just getting better at setting targets? Because that's important too. I mean, it shouldn't be a pie in the sky number. It should be a realistic number.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so it's not just that they did so much more work. They may have set their targets more realistically.
I can't answer the question in terms of how much is a result of that. The other thing I should mention is there's been changes in the targets themselves and how we measure the targets. So some of this improvement's a factor of that. I would say a lot of it's probably a factor of getting better at setting targets, exactly what you're saying. I don't know to what extent, we can attribute the success to that, but I'd probably say intuitively a good portion of it, we're getting better at setting more realistic targets and understanding that we are going to get sidetracked at times, and probably lowering the goal so that it's more realistic.
I also think that they are following up in much better. They are actually tracking the data and looking at the results before it's too late. So they're actually using information to manage in a much better way.
And that speaks to the efforts you touched on earlier, I think, or correct me if I'm wrong, but the commitment to the internal data processing becoming more real time in terms of availability of data, having verified data, working closely with the regional boards and the state board staff. So improving the internal mechanisms for data. Yes, very good.
And again, I mean, similar to the last item that we went to, it's not so much a report card as a tool to ask ourselves some questions in terms of why something happened. There may be a perfectly good explanation in some cases, which is why I'm glad you allowed for the text boxes. And in other places, it may suggest areas of improvement.
Yeah, and then I have to take the opportunity though, and note, the state board is probably almost bringing up the rear in terms of meeting our targets, right? But we had a discussion about this, and sometimes it's harder for the state board to articulate the targets. Or could you provide a little more discussion on what's the difference between regional board and state board targets?
Yeah, the state board targets tend to be things like the regional board targets tend to be things more like number of permits issued, number of TMDLs adopted, number of inspections conducted, whereas the regional board, or the state board, we bigger, larger, multi-year policies, different enforcement targets. Water rights is the one area where they're more like a region in that they implement the program rather than it being implemented at the regional board. So their targets are number of permits issued, number of petitions addressed in a year. But our targets, it's especially, for Division of Water Quality, I know that's an area that Vicki Whitney, the director, there is interested in making improvements into what we're actually measuring to make it more meaningful, but it's just a little bit harder to capture the work we do here in sort of these discrete outputs or chunks. So that's something, we definitely need to work on at State Board. And a number of years ago, we did add a number of State Board targets, but I'm not certain that we're looking at the right things yet. So it takes time. And then this is just sort of a nice summary of all of the work that we've done over the last year, and all this information's in the performance report. I won't go through all of the data, but it is interesting when you look at fiscal year 12-13 to fiscal year 13-14. I think in every category we did see improvements.
So that's not just a target setting difference, the actual numbers are higher. That's good to see that too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Rafa just commented, these are absolute numbers. So, 12 TMDLs versus 14 TMDLs, 276 million in SRF funds versus 579 million. So this is more work, and at a time when we had a lot of challenges over the last couple of years, the drought, drinking water coming over, just it does speak well to the amount that we've been able to accomplish.
Just curious on the drought, though. Does this capture the inspections? Does it capture curtailment?
I don't think these numbers capture the curtailment inspections that John O'Hagan mentioned earlier. I think he said he did 1,000. They've done over 1,000.
So there's
Because remember, this is through June 30th.
Yeah.
So this is a report for July 1 through June 30.
So next year there'll be a big bump up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at this point, we wanted to just quickly go to the live performance report. It's actually posted on our website, but I'm having some communication difficulties. This isn't working, though. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's weird. All right, hopefully this will continue to work. So this is just the front page of the report. It shows up a little strange on this screen here, but I'm just having trouble with the mouse.
Eric, if you want to tell us what you want to go to, we can navigate over here.
It's going to be a little tricky doing that, but how about...
Getting closer.
Oh, Karen's there. Okay, how about going to, scrolling down and going to the Plan and Assess tab first? And then on the left is the TMDL outcome cards. So I've shown you in the past some of these cards, and what I wanted to, if you scroll down lower, thanks Katie, a little bit lower. There you go. We've got this pie chart that shows that so far, I think we've got about 160, 170 TMDLs, and of those, we've now done these evaluation cards for 72 or 37%. We started these out as a pilot project a couple years back, and they've been growing ever since. And if you look at the stacked bar chart, it shows, it kind of breaks it out in 3 grading categories. And one's data inconclusive, improvement needed, conditions improving, targets achieved, and water bodies delisted. And when you look at it, essentially there's, 2 green categories that are, good news, either we delisted the water body or we seem to be on the way to delisting the water body, and 2 that, are not good news and that improvement still needed or the data is inconclusive, we just don't know. So basically it breaks out 50-50, where half of the, TMDL seem to be really on track, and then half either we're not sure, the data is inconclusive, or we're not seeing the results we like. And if you go into the individual cards, most of them, and I don't think we need to open one today, but most of them will tell you, the reasons why. It'll actually include data showing you why the TMDL is not being met. In many cases, it's simply we just need more time. Like the target date for meeting the objective is like in 2040, because some of these pollutants like sediment and temperature just take a really long time to address. And the ones where the target date is passed and they're still not meeting their objectives, there's usually a description as to, this is how we're adapting. This is what we're going to do to try to get this back on track. So mainly I just wanted to make the point that
Cool.
we're adding to this body of knowledge. The idea is this helps us evaluate individual TMDLs, but the hope is that as the data set builds, we'll be able to really figure out what approaches work and replicate those approaches, and then figure out what approaches are we using that don't seem to be as effective, and adapt and change. Katie, can you go to the target pages?
I think you've been responsive, I think, to board direction, in terms of trying to capture performance of our organization in terms of environmental outcome. And not just in TMDLs, but you've also started to look at other program areas as well, like groundwater. So I think this is an important trend for us to embrace.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in moving away from counting just outputs and looking at what's the water quality and what's the environmental outcome from the work we're doing. So why don't you scroll down, Rafa? Do you want to talk about why don't you click on Region 4, since they're sort of our shining star this year?
Yeah, good morning. The targets are basically, we have a new format to present information that goes from the general to the specific. And every one of these targets have been established at the beginning of the year with conversations with the program managers and the regions. And some of them are based on actual cost factors. So in most cases are based on the resources available. And at the bottom of the card, we actually show the resources that are allocated to that particular region for each program. So every one of these, there's a summary at the top. In case of Region 4, they met 91% of the targets. And we actually described the budget for the region. In this case, it's $18.5 million, and they have 137 staff. They made 100% of their permitting targets. They met 89% of the inspection targets, and they met 90% of the other targets. The reason why I think they missed the basin plan amendments and the inspections for MS4s. And maybe the reason for the MS4s inspections is because there was a little bit of confusion, and it's explained under the targets. You can see there it says that it was incorrectly calculated and included for the region. So they think that when they established the target to be 43 inspection, that was including other types of facilities. But we cannot agree to disagree, and finally they accepted that this was the original target.
It's interesting, it also highlights the fact that you actually have numbers, again, going back to the thing that percentages alone don't tell the story. It's
Correct.
percentage of what?
Correct.
And so having actually the numbers and an explanation is helpful.
Yeah, it has to be, it has to have a context.
Yes, and it has this number of staff there too.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
this speaks to a lot. I mean, it's still fresh in my memory, our September 23rd board meeting about fees and questions about, our resources and what we're spending on. And this is, you know, a good start as far as explaining that.
Correct. And one of the comments that we received for the region is that this is not all the work they do with those 14 PYs. So it's kind of like confuses because, you know, this it's not that they just did that. They do other things. But this, for us, these are the key performance indicators. This is the information, the expectation that was created to be, at a minimum, to be accomplished. And overall, we see a tremendous improvement in general. I think this format, we discussed this with the regions and with the programs, and it's much more user-friendly and actually provides information in a much more effective way. If you scroll down, Katie, we also show the resources for the entire region. There's a table that shows not just the budget for the region, but where is the money coming from? If it was fees, the general fund, or federal money, so how is those resources actually funded?
That's
So-
transparent.
All this information is available today, and is, you know, anybody can actually see it. That's what is.
So given that we can't control, maybe we'll just go back to the presentation.
Yeah, and it's an incredible amount of information, but we
Yeah.
really, you know, our goal here is to focus the discussion. So, you know,
Correct.
this information then can be used to for folks who have questions to really drill down to a specific area, ask the questions about why things aren't adding up, and giving us an opportunity to discuss it.
And it's also, maybe you go back to the summary of the targets, because we also have presented at the bottom the targets for next year. So you scroll down for every region, and including the state board, you
Wow.
can click on a region, and it shows the targets that we have for next year. Now, what is missing there is the resources.
Okay.
Um,
So when you're doing the target setting, I know I asked this last year, but when you're doing the target setting, then do you all do you get what the regions have put in, and then you have a conversation if it doesn't look right, like if it seems high ball or low ball, right?
Yeah, starting a couple years ago, we created this systematic method for setting the targets based on resources. So we have 4 programs now: NPDS, stormwater, waste discharge to land, and land disposal, where we provide them with this. It's a spreadsheet tool, and it's built with their resources are in there, a number of PYs, and then every activity that the program does: inspections, reviews, reports, rights permits, a complex permit, an easy permit. They're all listed, and they have a cost factor that we worked with the staff to develop. This is the average amount of time it should take to do these activities. So the work that they do then is tied to the resources they have available. And then normally every year, you know, there's sort of a meeting of the minds between state board executive, Tom, Karen, Jonathan, and the regional board EOs and AEOs, where they sort of gut check and ground truth. And we've done that every year. This year we actually have not gone through that process yet. Things have been just a little bit hectic. Like, again, we're 6 weeks behind getting this report out. Those conversations may still occur. These targets may then be adjusted, but we think any changes at this point would be very minor. But there is a process in place to sort of ground truth the information.
Great, thank you.
So why don't you go to just the last slide of the presentation, and we'll finish up with next steps. Thanks. So in terms of next steps, I talked about this already, but we feel like we need to figure out a way to improve the report by sort of winnowing it down a little bit, taking away. There's just a lot of information. I think we suffer from information overload. It's always tough because when we look at, well, what are we going to remove? We were like, oh, we don't want to remove that. That's an important,
Sure.
piece of information. But I feel like we really do need to do that so that we're focused in on just the key performance measures. That will be difficult, but we want to do that. We also want to improve data automation and increase improve the data in general. It's always a challenge. We're pulling information from 4 or 5 different databases that are used at a working level from staff in the regions and state board. And, you know, the better the data, the better the results. Everybody's happier and the report's just better off for it. But in terms of automation, the idea is we want the data to come directly from these databases, these 4 or 5 databases, automatically populate the performance reports. So it's sort of taking out the human step of culling through the data and, you know, formatting it and putting it in. We've done that to some extent, but we want to increase that. We want to build on the outcome cards, not only the water quality, the TMDL ones that we've showed you in the past, but we want to develop outcome measures for other programs. That's a message that we've heard, both from internally, staff really want to see that, and the external stakeholders think that's important as well. And we've heard that message loud and clear. We're going to be working with the AEOs to move forward with that in the coming year. Additionally, we want to transition the maintenance of the established cards, some of the ones that have been in place now for a few years, to the programs themselves. And we want to do this for a couple reasons. One, we want to free up our time so we can work on things like working on outcomes and what that will look like. But we also think it's important that the program managers sort of take ownership and responsibility for maintaining the cards and making sure they're accurate and the data is up to date. It just builds buy-in and ownership, and we think they'll use the information more, which brings us to the last point, is just using the information more. I mean, this is a great report. It started out as a pilot. We've proven it can be done. It provides a great level of transparency like I talked about, but if we don't use the information, it's just another, pretty report. And we want to work with management moving forward to use it more as a better planning and tracking tool. And we think we're going to have to build additional tools sort of to go alongside the report to help with that. But that's really the direction we want to go in. We want to address their concerns so that we get a tool that they can use, but we want to make sure it gets used. So I don't know, Rafa, if you've got any other. No, that's summarizes kind of where we're at to date and where we want to go.
Well, I think we also are gaining the trust of the regions and the program managers. We are improving our conversations with them, and really we are very responsive to their feedback, and I think that's helping us and them to actually to use the information to improve performance.
And then just one last thing, I did want to acknowledge a few people, especially
Please.
Rafa Maestu. I mean, he's really been the vision and the person that's taking the lead on getting the report done. Without him, honestly, we wouldn't be where we are today. We really are a leader. I mean, nobody, like I said, is doing in state government anything remotely close to what we've got. Also, Katie Landau, who helped with the slides earlier, she's been helping. She was really the lead on working with the regions to get those 26 new TMD outcome cards. And then none of this would happen without 2 other divisions, DIT, Division of Information Technology, and Office of Information Management and Analysis. Really, we've gotten a huge amount of help. I mean, what you see publicly is sort of the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There's so much that happens in the background. Robert Anderson and Susan Kelly do and others, but they primarily have been doing a lot of the web work, and there's a huge amount of web work that goes into this. The regional boards and the AOs, they all go through the process of setting targets, and the staff are keeping up with it, so we really appreciate it.
No, it's fabulous.
It's a team effort.
This is great. I just want to thank you and thank everyone that you just mentioned in terms of the commitment to this. And, just having been a staff person at the regional board in the 90s, I'm empathetic to not doing performance reports for performance reports, but having it be meaningful. And so I just want to support your statement about, this evolution. This is the 6th one. It feels that we're really improving. We're being responsive to the regional concerns. We're also committed at the state board to looking at our own performance and sharpening that tool. In the end, this becomes more meaningful to the staff level too, because in the end, we do want to evaluate our performance and set targets for ourselves down to the line staff. The more we evolve towards something that line staff believe in, and managers that they report to, the better off we're going to be. And I think that commitment to looking at outcome as well as output is crucial to making that something everyone can believe in. In the end, I just want to support what you're saying. Let's make this a useful tool, not the end of the fiscal year. And thanks to Los Angeles region, Central Valley, and others that have embraced this, and help us make it a better tool when it comes to just coming to work every day and getting work done and feeling good about it and getting credit for it. Thank you.
Anything else? Yeah, thank you all. It's great. One quick question. I know that you've that it's a model in state government. Do you mean in the state of California, or have you actually looked at other states across the country?
Rafa could probably answer this better because he's done more research on it. But I was talking about California state government, but I've also looked, at other states and what they're doing, and there are some good examples out there. I've never really seen, though, the transparency and honesty. I mean, this is pretty much, real results here, and we're not, if you notice, we're not hitting 100% of all our targets across all the regions. It's not always, a great public message, but it's an honest assessment. And I really haven't seen that, or again, the level of the scope of information that we've got. Rafa, I don't know if you
Yeah,
can.
what is different about our report is that we're integrating the resources with the outcomes. So there's this linkage. We are covering all the functions of the organization. We are describing what we do. We're describing how we are doing it. We are including that into the management system, which is the establishing of targets, so we can evaluate performance and at the same time have a systematic method of tracking and reporting results, which is an integrated system, and that's what is missing in other agencies. I mean, there are other states, they have a high level, but they don't really link it to the resources or to the priorities.
That's interesting. Let's talk a little bit later, because I'd love to have you all talk to some of the folks at the Kennedy School at the Innovations Program. I'm sure they'd love to hear about it. Great.
Thanks.
Impressive work. I know it's a massive amount, and thanks for recognizing everybody else that was involved in it. We really appreciate it. All right. Item number 8.
Speaking of performance,
Get that presentation up there. So good morning, Chair Marcus, members of the board. Christopher Stevens, supervising engineer with the Division of Financial Assistance. Going to talk a little bit today about the 2013-14 results for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. So just touch on financial results, some of the program results, and then wrap it up with some thoughts about noteworthy things that are going on today in the program. Let me just start out by kind of putting some numbers into the overall context of the program. The program has been making loans and other financial assistance since 1989. We've financed about 675 agreements. If you add those up, they total about $7.1 billion. If you were to add up all the dollars that we've ever been able to spend in the program, just by way of a reference point, we've dispersed 95% of those or expended 95% of those. Right now we have a little over $1 billion in outstanding commitments, so these are projects that have already been financed. Disbursements are going to go out over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So as far as the results for last year, we did 36 new agreements. As I think Eric and Rafa noted, about $580 million in new agreements. That is about 20% over our average over the last 7 or 8 years. To give you some sense, obviously one of the big advantages of the program is the cost that an applicant can save. Either through reduced interest rates or principal forgiveness. So if you compare that to what it would have cost for applicants to finance it on the market, we saved people a little over $200 million. Quite a few disbursements last year, just shy of $400 million, and that includes about $22 million in principal forgiveness.
And that's for disadvantaged communities.
Yes, there are 2 categories of disadvantaged communities, so they receive $22 million in actual disbursements. And then significantly, every year we have an independent audit. We had no audit findings or observations on that, so a very key parameter in the program. Over the last several years, of course, one of the topics that has been prominent nationwide with the SRF programs, both the drinking water as well as the clean water, is unliquidated obligations. These are dollars that have been awarded to a state but haven't been dispersed yet. So that's been kind of an issue for some states over the years. I'm happy to say on the clean water side that at the end of the year we had about 1.6% unliquidated obligations. That compares on the clean water side nationwide with about 3.8% average unliquidated obligations. And then one thing I did touch on last year was the amount of cash in the program. And trying to bring that down. You know, we've had significant cash in the bank levels over the last several years, and we did bring that down by about $80 million. We started out at the beginning of the year about $430 million, brought it down to about $350 million at the end of the year. And just for those that are visually inclined, like me, this is a graph that kind of summarizes some of those things. The purple bars are the amount of financing per year in dollars, and then the red bars, the smaller red bars, are the number of projects. And then the purple line is what I was referring to as a cash balance. You can kind of see it coming down a little bit at the end of last year.
That's so interesting. Thank you for doing it both ways.
Yeah, it's got 10 years of data there,
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a lot in that slide.
or 9.
So I guess one noteworthy thing is there is a general upward trend there. Obviously, there's variation year to year, but I think generally you can see that the program is financing more and more each year on average. Just to break down the categories of projects that we funded, they were all infrastructure projects, but I guess one noteworthy thing I did want to highlight is that category of storm sewers, which is something that we don't generally finance because, you know, it's hard to come up with a revenue source to repay a loan. There was 2 projects in that category. Both of those were with the Orange County Water District, where they were capturing water and using that for groundwater recharge.
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
try to build on that in the future. Couple of key initiatives for the program that I did want to touch on. Of course, you mentioned disadvantaged communities. So we had, you know, in this category 1 of small disadvantaged communities, kind of the traditional small disadvantaged communities of less than 20,000 population. That, of course, does work in conjunction with our small community grant program. That's the program that is funded by the fee on the loans. And so we had 5 of those 36 agreements received about $12 million in principal forgiveness, plus there were 10 projects that received small community grants. That was another $15 million. So those really work in conjunction with each other. And then category 2 is other disadvantaged communities. There were 2 projects in that category for about $3.6 million. And then just to remind you, in March, the board, of course, approved a 1% interest rate as an incentive to spur water recycling projects. So we've been working on that since then. These numbers are a little bit dated, so I had put them as of October 1. We had about $100 million in financing executed for water recycling projects. At that point, we had about $120 million in other applications that were under review. Now, that has changed significantly over the last month or so. Last time I checked with staff I think there's about $1 billion in applications for that
Big
money.
month.
Big money, yes. Almost half of that is the city of Los Angeles. They want $450 million.
Oh, yeah, they've discovered us, I heard.
Yes.
Yes, I heard that.
Of course, we were just talking about performance measures, so we do have 2 performance measures in the program. Starting to build up a little bit of a track record there. Just to remind you, the first is we want to have, from the time we receive a complete application to the time we have an executed agreement, we are trying to have that, trying to do that in less than 9 months. And our target there is to do that for at least 95% of the applications. You can see a pretty dramatic improvement there between last year and the year before.
How'd you pick 9 months? You figure someone could have a baby in that amount of time, you could at least process an application?
No, but I suppose there's an analogy there somewhere. that was, you know, my seat of the pants kind of estimate of, if I were on the other side, you know, at what point would I start to be frustrated
Yeah,
with
that's
how
a
long
good
it's
measure.
taking? And
Yeah,
that
that's
seemed
fair.
like a good target.
I appreciate the subliminal message of this slide with
Yeah,
the green
right,
infrastructure.
very good green
You know,
infrastructure slide.
trying to encourage people, get financing for green infrastructure, not just the old style. Well, that's important too.
Yes. So I attribute that improvement there largely to, well, significantly to the changes that were approved by the board in May of last year, the process and application improvements there.
Oh, good, thank you.
The other performance measure we have is from the time we get a complete disbursement request to fulfilling that. I want to try to do that in 30 days or less. That's always been one of the shining points in our program, but still there's probably some room for improvement there. We're getting close to 90% on that. I wanted to do something a little bit different this year. Last year, we instituted, every time we send a financing agreement to somebody for their signature, we also send them a customer survey. So I wanted to try to get some sense of how people perceive us. I have some idea about that, but wanted to get a little bit more quantitative about that. So I've got 3 slides here I'll go through, and the first slide deals with really process questions. Was the application easy to complete? Were the instructions clear? Did people think that the application was reviewed in a timely manner? Was the process efficient? So on and so forth. Generally, on balance, I think you know, the results are favorable. The green and the kind of aqua are the strongly agree or agree. But there was some neutral and some disagree as well. But on balance, I think people generally viewed us favorably in that regard. The next set of questions dealt with customer service. Was staff courteous and helpful? Did they provide complete and accurate information? Did they respond in a timely way? Very strongly agree or agree on that slide. And similarly, the overall results, was their general overall experience positive? Would they consider using Clean Water ESSER funding in the future? Would they recommend it to others? So again, you know, the process questions were generally favorable, but there's definitely a noticeable difference between questions, their responses to process questions, and those on customer service. So I mean, I think my general comment to that is, I think that speaks very strongly to the dedication and the quality of staff that work in the program. And I think intuitively, you know, the process is what it is. We have a certain amount of control over it. We don't have complete control over it. And I think just intuitively, if we didn't have good customer service or we had mediocre customer service, that I think those results would have been flipped very dramatically there.
That's good you asked those questions, that's great.
So, and I'm very happy to sing the praises of, you know, the staff that are working in the program. I think that speaks very strongly to their dedication to the work. Just to wrap it up with some noteworthy things about the program. Last year I mentioned having a marketing plan and revamping the SRF website. So didn't quite get those finished by the end of the year, but we got pretty close. And so we did wrap up the marketing plan. We have a written marketing plan that is posted on our website. That was posted in July, and then we did complete the revamp of our website in August of this year. Of course, another thing that is going on currently is the drinking water program, and a very significant part of that is the drinking water SRF, as well as the other financing programs that were previously at CDPH. So we're working on a daily basis, you know, to try to integrate those two programs, get as much synergy and efficiency as we can out of those programs. And that's just an ongoing daily process. I mean, I think that's going to continue forever as both of those programs evolve over time, of course. But certainly over the next year is really when the hard work is going to happen there. Two kind of interrelated things. In June of this year, Congress and the President passed the Water Resources Reform and Development Act, made a number of changes, kind of a hodgepodge of changes to the Clean Water SRF program. And then, of course, we've touched on the water bond today that's on the ballot. And so both of those things, will have, there's quite a bit of crossover between the SRF program and the water bond. You've got small disadvantaged community funding in there, stormwater funding in there, water recycling funding in the water bond. And so I'm anticipating that sometime in the first half of 2015, we will bring another policy amendment to you to implement those changes from the WRDA bill, as well as, coordinating the water bond funding if that is approved. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is, of course, the board made those changes to the process in May of last year, and we've made other policy changes, significantly going to 30-year financing for all projects. So we've gotten the attention of some rather large borrowers, and currently we are reviewing an application from Sacramento Regional. I think their latest estimate is actually $1.8 billion over about 10 years. That could change. I'm expecting, and we may have gotten part of the application from LACSD, they need about $600 million over 10 years. We've had several discussions with San Francisco PUC about their capital improvement plan, about $6 billion over 20 years. Also, City of San Jose, we've had some preliminary discussions with them. So, that of course will help us as well as the applicants in a number of different respects. I touched on earlier the cash balance, and certainly having that amount of demand would help us manage that cash in the program. Getting to know these borrowers, there's a certain efficiency there of dealing with the same borrower over and over. There are a lot of documents and parts of the process that apply to an agency. They apply to multiple projects, and so it isn't necessarily each and every time reviewing an application from someone you've never seen before and you're starting from scratch. With these agencies, there's a certain familiarity that would be built up between the agency as well as us. The flip side of that, of course, is that is a lot of money. And we don't necessarily have on hand or in our cash flow at this point enough money to be able to finance all of those projects. And so that will push us into the municipal bond market on a more regular basis. And of course, that has certain implications for the program. We need to, we do spend a lot of time on cash flow and forecasting, but that's going to even be more important for us in the future. We'll want to maintain high standards for control of the program, accounting controls and those sorts of controls, because we want to maintain a high credit rating and access to the bond market.
You want to say that again, what the credit rating is, because it's so nice to hear.
AAA.
Yeah. You want to say that one more time?
AAA.
Yeah, love that. I like it in baseball too, but it's even better here.
So but that in my mind is just a further evolution of the program. We've set the stage for that, knowing that's where we wanted to go, and so that's flowering in my estimation.
Great.
So that was all I had. Did you have some questions?
That's a nice report. Thank you very much. I'm sort of liking the reports today. I mean, we should actually think about, because sometimes when we're doing the reports and we know there are a bunch of people who aren't usually with us waiting for some big controversial decision, we don't, I don't want to try and figure out how to do this on purpose somehow.
Yeah,
Just a
and
thought.
I know, and
Because then we
but
can take our time too. Yeah.
this is a nice feedback of some decisions we made in the last couple of years. Whether it was revamping the process and some of the terms, which has gotten a lot of interest, or making the low-interest recycling money available and seeing what happened with that. And so, thanks to staff for following through on those things. But it's good to hear this and other program decisions and finding out, learning lessons from the decisions we've made. And it's nice when we got it right. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your professionalism and the whole team. It's really great. And we do some good. Every one of those dollars does some good. Great, thank you. Item number 9. Last but definitely not least. I love this issue. Not that I love urban pesticides, but I love this issue.
I'm live here, yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. For self-introductions, I'm Tom Mumley, Assistant Executive Officer of the San Francisco Bay Water Board.
Do you want to talk about the performance report and how much you love it? No, it's just a joke. Don't answer that
No, I
question.
want to, I'm here because this is an area that I've put a fair amount of passion towards, a lot of effort for quite a few years, which you'll hopefully capture in mine and the additional presentations. The key to this is in the title, that we indeed have experienced significant amount of successful collaboration with the Department of Pesticide Regulation, and as well as substantial involvement by municipalities throughout the state to address this challenge. And that's really the positive. And if anything, the purpose of this item was to, if you'll, celebrate the successes that we've experienced, particularly how much DPR has stepped up, and it's to tell you, to inform you and the public through this exercise, and to obviously welcome, I personally welcome your challenge to say, keep it up. So I think you'll see how that plays out during the course of our sort of workshop, panel type workshop set up here. So we have a series of presenters. I will start providing sort of the background, particularly the water quality regulatory background, and a little bit of the history behind this, followed by DPR, Department of Pesticide Regulation, giving its perspective. And as you may note, we have Brian Leahy, the executive director here, who will make some opening remarks before David Duncan, who heads up the environmental monitoring branch at DPR, will speak. Then Rich Brewer, who's from our Office of Information Management Assessment, will speak in terms of the coordinated monitoring efforts that has happened to date and where we're going. And then, certainly not least, but last, will be Dave Tamayo, who is a key player in CASCA and the pesticide arena, and he's also a key player in the county of Sacramento. He leads their focused pollutant management efforts, which particularly of interest is pesticides. So he'll provide the municipal perspective. Right. With that, I sort of thought of two headlines, and then, whoops, I guess I get to do this, right? And I go there. The first, this is the negative headline, and it is reflected of our water board surface water ambient monitoring program from a few years ago now, where we monitored and found toxicity in most urban watersheds throughout California, and in most cases we saw either direct or indications that toxicity was linked to pesticides, currently used pesticides. So that's the negative headline.
Right.
The positive headline is that we've made substantial progress vis-a-vis this collaborative effort to hopefully in the future eliminate this headline and prevent new headlines from emerging. So it's a dual role. We have a challenge, but there's a positive part of the story.
That's going to help me sleep at night. This
Yeah.
actually is an issue I have lost sleep over the years, so that's great.
Yeah. And then, so the story started a while back. I mean, literally, it's been 20 plus years that we have been engaged in this issue, starting in the early 1990s when within the Bay Area, and at the same time within the Sacramento region, we in conjunction with municipalities were doing monitoring of urban creeks, and lo and behold, we were essentially finding toxicity everywhere at all times. We didn't know what was causing it, though. We didn't even suspect pesticides. We were thinking industrial toxics or whatever. But through using the procedures that have been established to identify toxicity found in municipal wastewater, those toxicity identification evaluation tools were available. We applied them to our urban creeks toxicity efforts, and lo and behold, we discovered the toxicity was due to organophosphate pesticides, specifically diazinon. Also, chlorpyrifos, was also known as Dursban, was also in there. They're both organophosphate pesticides. And then, not surprising, why we are finding toxicity throughout urban creeks is that diazinon was widely used. It was the most widely used current use pesticide at the time. So and so when we looked for, after that, we started looking for diazonide in all these urban creeks. Guess what? We found them essentially in all the urban creeks.
So you go to the lawn and garden store first to see what's on the shelf, and then you go look for it in the creek.
Well, part of the challenge is you see the products at the hardware store, but the active ingredient is in small print in there, and that's the pesticide. And then the package can look the same. The pesticide active ingredient can even change over time. But key to this one part I put up there, I want to recognize that in the mid-1990s when we discovered this, we said, what are we going to do? We being my counterparts at the Sacramento Regional Water Board, as well as the Sacramento and the Bay Area municipalities, said we need to work together in this, and we need to figure out how do we manage this. So we invited, back then, the Department of Pesticide Regulation. We invited members of the pesticide industry came to the table, and even the professional applicators. We formed this stakeholder group that has been sustained in one form or another throughout all this period, although currently it's barely, there's not a formal forum, but there's communication through an email sort of forum that's there. So, but the key is that we've gotten to where we're here today by starting, but let's get the players who know what's going on and together, and we learn from each other explain our water quality concerns to the pesticide players, and the pesticide players explain how pesticides are regulated and managed. We've come a long, long way. In the early days, I was wondering how are we ever going to resolve this, particularly when we would make observations that applications in accordance with labeled directions are potential causes. It wasn't just illegal use, dumping, or overuse. So lo and behold, we had the good fortune that in the late 90s, US EPA phased out urban use of diazonon, though we like to think sometimes we were part of the cause of that. We were a minor player. It was human health reasons why that was phased out, and there were some other economic factors that I think that came into play that caused what we refer to the registrant, the owner of the manufacturing diazonon, agreed to phase out. But the good news is the cause of widespread observed toxicity was going to be phased out. So quick pause. During this dialogue, particularly with DPR and we trying to gather information on this challenge, one thing was obvious, that there was information on urban uses was not as readily available as information on agricultural uses. There are certain urban uses that are reported, but over-the-counter sales are not reported, et cetera. But I don't know when the needle went to the urban side, but somewhere in the recent past, we determined, and DPR determined, that more pesticides are used to control urban pests than use in agriculture. And that's kind of was not surprising, but also a head turner. And I think this has a lot to do with the progress we've made to date, because DPR saw that it had a challenge and that it was structured primarily around the urban side of things. I mean, their roots were in the Department of Agriculture before they became part of the Environmental Protection Agency. So they've since done quite a bit to improve how they manage the urban side of the shop. So that's probably wanted to draw attention to that. I also want to draw the attention that there are multiple aspects of urban uses that are of concern. We're going to focus attention on outdoor use associated with stormwater, urban runoff concerns. There are concerns about indoor uses, particularly in uses that could end up with pesticides getting into municipal wastewater and past and potentially future wastewater plant compliance issues associated with pesticides. So there are concerns.
The health risk to little kids.
Pardon?
The health risk to little kids and others who don't use it right in the home.
Well, there's that, but
Yeah.
I mean, think, but relative to wastewater, think flea baths and stuff like that. That pesticides that are actually washed, by the use.
As part of the purpose. Got it.
Yeah, So I just wanted to call attention to that, but we're going to focus in on the urban side. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of the issue. So this is just a sort of simple cartoon that I've used multiple times over the years. We're talking about applications to address pesticides. Typically, people think about lawn and garden, but I quickly put on here the building because it's on the run-up side of things. We have concern about lawn and garden applications, but we're particularly concerned about applications directly to impervious surfaces, particularly use of pesticides for structural pest control. And commonly, it's like ants, and so a lot of these products are designed to be applied in bands around buildings, regardless of whether it's pervious or impervious surface. So clearly, if you apply a large amount of pesticides to a paved surface that's exposed to runoff, guess what? You have a transport pathway to creeks and other waters. So that's the concern that we discovered years ago, that a big reason for observed toxicity in urban creeks is directly related to structural use of pesticides for structural pest control. And this just a snapshot back that due to our initial concerns with diazinon and associated pesticides, we ended up through the 303D listing process of putting all urban creeks in the San Francisco Bay region on the list of impaired waters. So for toxicity attributed to diazinon, and there's a reason for that which I'll explain, but this just illustrates how the approach that we started with in the Bay Area. Now, as I said earlier, that we had the good fortune that US EPA phased out use of diazinon. These are early data just showing a downward trend in the amount of diazinon and chlorpyrifos used in the urban setting. I could show you a similar graph going, this essentially goes down to nil, because obviously their use for urban uses is no longer allowed. Mm-hmm. And the associated toxicity that we would observe due to diazinon also went to zero.
Oh, well, good.
So that's the good news. Now, the not so good news was
Erythroids
partly
took
not
place,
surprising.
right. Yeah.
This shows you what coincident with the downward trend in diazinon use, we started seeing an upward trend in pyrethroids, which is a bunch of different pesticides, as you may know. And as I said earlier, even the same product, you would see the package looks the same. The active ingredient was just changed from diazinon to...
Oh, so it looks exact, that makes sense, actually. So you buy your product, which has a fancy name, and the little language at the bottom changes.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So that's the bad news. And this, not surprising, we started observing pyrethroids and pyrethroid-associated toxicity in urban watersheds throughout the state. And this is just a snapshot that was compiled by, I think it was compiled by the Casca folks, just showing the preliminary data. And so not surprising, where we used to see diazinon, we start seeing pyrethroids. Now, the good news is over trend, we start seeing somewhat of either a trend down and maybe a leveling out. It's not relevant right now whether it's continued downward trend or leveling out, but fortunately it's not increasing, which is good, but still a large amount of pyrethroid are used for in the urban setting. That's what continues to be the concern. So I just saying it may not be getting worse, but there's plenty of pyrethroids being used to sustain the urban creek toxicity machine until we had some form of intervention, which is going to be part of the good story. They're emerging, now it's not just pyrethroids, there are other alternatives to diazinon that are out there on the market, and one that gets our attention, it's fipronil. And actually, if you look, you look over here, the numbers are tens of thousands, where in the pyrethroids, there are hundreds of thousands. They're just showing much smaller amounts of fipronil, but the issue is the use has increased, and